All right, so buckle up, everyone, because we are diving headfirst into this wild 2024 election. And we've got...
a lot to unpack.
We do, don't we? We're taking a look at this YouTube video today from Brett Meiselas over at Midas Touch, trying to see if we can make sense of all this, go beyond the spin cycle.
Always a worthy endeavor, trying to cut through the noise.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Meiselas, he starts off with a real bang. Leaked internal polling data. Now, this isn't your grandma's public opinion poll, the kind you see plastered everywhere. This is the good stuff. This is from the Republican Senate Leadership Fund, the ones backing the GOP Senate candidates. And what they're seeing, well, it's
eye-opening, to say the least. It suggests a much closer race than a lot of the public polling has been showing. Mm-hmm. And we know how those can be manipulated.
Oh, yeah, those public polls. They're more like a carefully curated snapshot, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But these internal numbers, they're like a peek behind the curtain. Take Michigan and Maryland, for example. Key battleground states. And these leaked polls show Democrats with a solid, 8-point lead?
8 points. That's huge.
It is significant. And it looks like even those traditionally red states might not be so safe anymore. The polls, they actually show Ted Cruz just barely ahead. 1 single point separating him from the Democratic challenger, Colin Allred. In Texas, of all places.
Texas. A nail-biter. Now, that's something I haven't heard before. Okay, so we've got these potentially game-changing polls, but then Meiselas hits us with another twist, signs of panic from, you guessed it, Donald Trump.
Interesting contrast, isn't it? Outwardly projecting strength, while behind the scenes there seems to be a different story unfolding.
Exactly. And Meiselas, he points to these reports from the New York Times talking about Trump having these, shall we say, lively dinners with donors. He's apparently not too happy about the amount of financial support he's been getting, putting the squeeze on them for more. Not exactly the mark of a confident campaign, is it?
It does make you wonder about the state of his campaign finances. Maybe even a dip in enthusiasm amongst his base. If those leaked polls are accurate, those tighter races could be causing some anxiety in the Trump camp.
Anxiety leading to, well, some interesting behavior.
Potentially. Meiselas goes on to analyze Trump's recent public appearances, comparing them to his rallies in the past. There's this one photo in particular that he focuses on. He says Trump looks, well, worn down, stressed even.
Like he's putting on a brave face, but it's cracking a bit.
Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the Coachella rally.
Oh, that rally.
Quite the spectacle.
Understatement of the year. We're talking 100-degree heat, people fainting left and right before Trump even took the stage.
And that's not even mentioning the speech itself.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
The speech, let's just say it was a classic Trump performance all over the place, kind of rambling and, of course, full of exaggerations, like when he claimed the crowd size was way bigger than it actually was.
A classic tactic.
Right. But it's what happened after the rally that's really interesting. Total transportation nightmare. People stuck for hours, no buses in sight, having to walk miles back to their cars in that ridiculous heat. And who gets the blame?
Anyone and everyone except the Trump campaign. Naturally.
Naturally. And speaking of contrasts, Meiselas then cuts to Vice President Harris at this event in North Carolina. Talk about a 180.
It really does feel like a different world.
Right. She's engaging with voters, talking policy, giving this message of hope and unity, completely different vibe.
It highlights the stark difference in their campaigning styles, wouldn't you say? Their approach to connecting with voters. Mm-hmm. On one hand, you have this focus on energizing a base through fear and resentment. And then there's this appeal to a broader electorate with a message of hope and unity. It really makes you wonder which strategy will be more effective in 2024. It's like we're watching 2 completely different campaigns unfold, 2 different visions for America.
2 different playbooks, that's for sure. Something else struck me in that Harris clip. Meiselas, he points out this moment where she addresses Trump not releasing his medical records.
Ah, yes, the age-old question of transparency. Always a hot topic, especially when you have, shall we say, seasoned candidates.
Right, and she doesn't let it go either. Harris makes this point of saying, it's pretty unusual for a presidential candidate to be so hush-hush about their health. Makes you wonder, right?
It does plant a seed of doubt, doesn't it?
Especially with all those signs of stress that Meiselas was highlighting earlier.
Exactly. Speaking of which, remember how Meiselas keeps coming back to this clash between fear-based messaging and, well, a more hopeful, optimistic tone.
Yeah, like Trump's whole occupied country thing versus Harris talking about loving thy neighbor.
Precisely. And Meiselas, he gives this really stark example of this contrast. He brings up how Trump keeps saying America is being overrun by immigrants, right?
Yeah.
Going so far as to use this fake AI-generated image.
Wait, a fake image?
Yeah, it showed all these classrooms packed to the brim with students trying to imply they were all immigrants. The problem is the image.
Yeah.
Completely fapped. Pretty striking. Although things do get, well, a little unsettling when Meislas mentions this one statement from Trump about the enemy within, he calls them.
Yeah, that's where I got a bit chills, not gonna lie.
I can see why. Trump actually suggests that, maybe he'd use the National Guard or even the military to handle these so-called enemies.
Hold on a second. That's not something you hear every day from a presidential hopeful, using the military against your own citizens because they don't agree with you. That's not just like campaign rhetoric. That's some scary stuff.
It is incredibly dangerous rhetoric, and it really highlights just how important this election is, right? Meislas does try to end on a cautiously optimistic note. He stresses how vital it is for everyone to vote, make their voices heard.
Because when it's this close, every vote really does count. And it's bigger than just picking a candidate, isn't it? It's about protecting our democracy.
Absolutely. Red versus blue, that's just one part of it. This election is about the very foundation of our government, of our country.
So what does this all mean for our listeners out there? Well, for one, it shows you can't just accept everything you hear, especially during an election.
Be skeptical. Question everything. Look for the evidence. Consider the source, their biases, their motivations.
Basically channel your inner internet detective. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it, right? How much influence something like a YouTube video can have these days. We're talking about shaping the entire political landscape, and it's all happening online.
It's a whole new world out there, isn't it? And like you said, it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you've got this incredible platform for diverse voices, for people to get their message out there. But on the other hand, it's like a breeding ground for misinformation, for propaganda.
Yeah.
It's almost symbolic of this election, don't you think? Hope and danger all wrapped up in one.
So how are voters supposed to make sense of it all? It's like you can't just tune it all out, but you also can't believe everything you see. What advice would you give to someone who wants to be an informed voter but doesn't want to get lost in the weeds?
Well, I think it all comes down to, media literacy, being able to sift through all that noise and figure out what's credible, what's not. It's about looking for evidence, considering the source, understanding their biases, their agenda. It's like being a detective in this crazy digital age.
Love that analogy. We all need to put on our detective hats. Which makes you wonder how much the campaigns themselves are thinking about this whole everyone's an information detective thing.
It's a fascinating dynamic, isn't it? You've got Trump, for example, really doubling down on those rallies on social media, bypassing traditional media almost entirely, trying to control that narrative directly.
And then there's Vice President Harris. She's using social media too, of course, but also engaging with traditional media outlets, giving interviews, participating in debates. It's like two different strategies playing out in real time.
Exactly. It's a balancing act, really. Trying to reach voters who are bombarded with information from all sides, while also trying not to get caught in the crossfire of all that misinformation, really highlights how much the media landscape has changed, wouldn't you say? Mm-hmm. And how campaigns are adapting, or in some cases not adapting.
It's like a high-stakes chess match, with each side making their move, trying to anticipate the other's next step. And it goes beyond just the issues themselves, doesn't it? There's so much strategy involved in shaping the narrative.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because ultimately that's what it all comes down to, isn't it? The power of narratives. It's not just about the policies themselves. It's about the stories we tell ourselves, the vision of America we're presented with. And those narratives, they have a profound impact on how we view the world, on our values, even on our decisions when we step into that voting booth.
Whoever controls the narrative controls the country, right?
Yeah.
We've talked about fear versus hope, division versus unity. What other narratives do you think are at play in this election?
Oh, there are so many. Economic anxiety is a big one. The pace of cultural change, the very idea of what it means to be American. These are all narratives being fiercely debated right now.
So it's not just about picking a president, it's about choosing a direction for the entire country. Wow. This deep dive has been, enlightening, to say the least. You've given us a lot to think about.
It's a complex landscape out there, but that's the beauty of democracy, isn't it? It's an ongoing conversation, a process of discovery, and it requires us all to be engaged, informed, and, maybe a little bit skeptical.
Couldn't put it better myself. This deep dive has been incredible, and I have a feeling we'll be revisiting these themes as we get closer to Election Day. But for now, let's all try to stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged. Because the future of our democracy might just depend on it.